We now move on to my round 5 game, and this was played against a Finnish player called Samalvuo, and his rating is about 2480, strong international master. This is probably actually most interesting game, and one of the games I enjoyed playing the most. Completely incorrect chess. The computer would hate this game from my point of view and just say I was clearly worse at a number of points, but I think this demonstrates maybe my style of play, and also a style of play which I think is still relevant even in this modern age of computer resources and computer defences. I still think there's a lot of scope in chess to play very imaginative attacking ideas which aren't entirely sound, and I don't think you have to play as a computer all the time to get great results. The opening was very interesting, the middle game was very interesting, but I came up with a new idea, well not new, but a very relatively new idea in the opening that will be featured in my forthcoming DVD on 1D4, and it leads to extremely exciting chess. I was also in a high on this game after beating Gelfand in the last round, maybe a little bit hungover, maybe extremely hungover, but I managed to battle through this one to have the right to play Nakamura in the next round. So the game started d4 for a change. I was white in this game, so I had enough of e4. I like changing things about because I think it's good to stay fresh in chess. As soon as you start getting a little bit bored or whatever, play a new opening because you always get new and interesting positions. My opponent played knight f6, c4, e6. Knight to f3, so the Queen's Indian defence, an opening that I have played for most of my life with 1d4, b6, and now the trendy move g3. So there's two moves here, bishop to b7 and bishop to a6. Bishop to a6 is what all the top 2700 players seem to be playing at the moment. And now I continue queen c2, which is the sharpest line. Now there's two moves here, c5, which my opponent played, and bishop to b7. Now, in most top games, actually, I noticed that black continues with c5, but in my opinion, this is actually quite a serious mistake, and the number of 2,700 players that have played this is quite phenomenal. The reason I think this is a mistake is that after d5, pawn takes, bishop b7, it's worth noting that knight takes d5 is not possible here, because of queen to e4 check, winning a piece. But after c takes d5, bishop to b7, instead of playing bishop to g2, which enters the standard sacrificial variations, I can now instead play pawn to e4. Now, if we just go back to position after queen to c2, if black had played bishop to b7, bishop to g2, c5, d5 takes, I can no longer do this possibility. So I think c5 allows this extra possibility to me, which is, I think, in my opinion, very good for white, or very dangerous for black. The point being that after e4, which is hardly ever played, but I think it's a great sacrifice, white seems to get very good play, and there's not really any theory on this line. My opponent really has to grab a pawn here, otherwise it's going to be very cramped, and the bishop on b7 is going to be an extremely bad piece. So my opponent continue queen e7, bishop to d3, and now knight takes d5. This has all been seen before. Knight to b4 is a threat, so a3. Now you may think, what have I got in return for the piece, the pawn even? Well, I've got quick development, my opponent can't castle easily, and I have just generally very good compensation, as you'll soon see. And again, there's no theory on this variation. Now, to be honest, I looked in the database, and there's one game I saw in this which continued with f5. And I found a very important novelty here. After castles, f takes e4, rook to e1, knight to f6, knight c3, d5. And now in the previous game, I think Sebastian Siebrecht, a strong German grandmaster, played bishop to g5 here, and he went on to win the game. But I think even stronger than this move is the possibility of bishop to f4. And I think black's in serious trouble, even though he's 2 pawns up here. For example, one variation I looked at was knight to bd7, and now the very strong move, knight to g5. This stops black's king moving to f7 and pairs sacrifices on d5 and e4. And if black castles queenside, then knight to b5, immediately threatening knight takes a7, checkmate. And I think this is very good for white, and I was really hoping my opponent would play this. But after a long think, my opponent refused to play this and instead played knight to c7. I hadn't looked at this position in the morning, but I assumed that white will have good counterplay. I simply castled, and now my opponent played queen to d8, with the idea of going bishop to e7 and castling. Now, in hindsight, maybe I should just play simple moves like knight to c3 here, but I got carried away with quite a romantic idea, b4. And my idea here is just to sacrifice a pawn for more quick development. I want to put my bishop here, which makes it hard for black to develop. We've got a very interesting position after c takes, and now bishop to b2. My opponent continued knight to c6, so he has 2 pawns up, but it's hard for him to get castled. And now bishop to c4. So maybe threatening some sacrifices at some stage. He should probably go b5 here, but instead he went knight to e6. And now I played knight to h4. And my knight comes into f5, attacking g7 and maybe potential coming to d6. And I was very happy in my position here, even though theoretically it's probably not entirely sound with perfect defence from black. But in practical chess, very hard to defend against my attack here. My king is safe, and my pieces are taking up very good positions. My opponent should go rook c8 here, but instead queen to c7 was a mistake. He wants to go knight to a5, swap queens off, so bishop to d5 now improves my position. Rook to c8, and now rook to c1. It's worth noting here now that this knight can't really move because I can always have queen to d2 at the worst, but maybe even some stronger options. So my opponent is really completely tied down here. I mean, okay, he goes bishop to c5, but then knight to f5, and this is already starting to look very dangerous. And I'm very happy in the game here, even though the pawn disadvantage. My opponent castled, and now queen to d1, which I think is a very good move. I prefer the d1 square because it keeps control of d4, and the queen simply wants to come over to g4 with checkmate to follow. Also, my rook is lined up against the black queen. My opponent now started to crumble here. He had to play something like f6 in this position, and he can fight on. Instead, he played b takes a3, and after knight takes a3, I think he's in serious trouble. All my pieces are attacking, his king is weak, and I have a number of open lines to attack on. The game continued d6, another error, allowing bishop takes g7. Knight takes g7 is pretty much forced, and now queen to g4. He can't play f6 because of the pin on the pawn, so his only move is bishop to d4. And around here I had a long think, and I saw that I could win a piece quite simply, but I got carried away trying to be too much of a perfectionist. I mean, the first move I was going to play very quickly was knight to b5. This made the most logical sense because all my pieces are starting to flood into his position there. But I thought instead of this line, which gets rather complicated, I keep it simple. The variation I calculated here was pawn to h5. I think he has to throw this move in, and now queen to g6. With some incredibly dangerous threats. If he just plays something like queen to d7, I can go knight takes d4, and he can't stop mate on g7, so this is clearly not possible. I thought he had to try knight to e7 here, and I saw this variation, and so many pieces on pre, it's a fascinating position, and I saw I could play knight to h6 check, king h8, knight takes s7 check, rook takes, queen h6 check, king g8, takes, and I assess this as being very good for me, but I also saw that black has a number of minor pieces in the position. It's quite a complicated line, even though it is just clearly winning. So instead of going for this variation, I decided, right, let's keep things simple. So I play knight takes d4, which should just be winning very easily as well. My opponent played h5, and now originally I intended just to play queen to h3. The point being, I'm going to win a piece on c6 because of the pin, because black's queen can't move anywhere away. And I saw after queen to h3, I keep control of the d7 square, so he can't play queen to d7. And this will just be winning. But instead I played a mistake. I played queen to d1, trying to be very clever. The point being, after queen to d7, I go queen to a4. And I pick off a piece, but I thought I'm going to make more simplifications in the position. But I totally missed my position. My opponent had knight to e6 coming back into the game. The point being, if I go knight takes c6, he goes knight to c5, and the position gets very unclear around here. So I was quite annoyed myself here, and I had a long think, and I thought, right, rather than win a piece now, let's just forget about that. Let's just mate the guy. Let's just checkmate the guy, you know. I mean, okay, there's no point messing about anymore. I'm a bit annoyed I didn't win the piece simply. Let's go for his king. So the knight came back. Simple plan to bring my queen now back around to the right side of the board. Why on earth did I put it on the queen side? I mean, must be getting in a bit like, I don't know, I'm going a bit senile in my old age or something. I mean, I never normally play like this, trying to be too clever. My opponent played knight g7, and still the next plan is very important. Like I said, I can give up now on winning a piece, instead I'm going for checkmate. And I exchange on g7, and I think my next move is quite a clever move. Look at my pieces. Which pieces are bad? The knight on a3 is a very bad piece. I need to reroute this knight around to a better square. And here I continued with knight to c2, bringing it around to the f5 square, attacking the king. The point being that black still can't unravel easily, because if he tries to with knight to e5, I win a piece with queen takes d7, knight takes d7, bishop takes b7. So I have a bit of time to put my plan into motion. My opponent played rook to c7, and I think this is a critical mistake. He should play rook on fd8, and he still have chances of survival. But after rook to c7, the knight finds its home, and now knight to f5 check, and this should be completely winning. Again, all I need to do here is stop him unravelling with knight to e5. As long as I can stop him playing this move, then he can't move his piece in his game. So I think my next move is one of the best moves of the game, actually. He is probably threatening to go knight to e5. I have a lot of interesting and tempting continuations, but after the move rook to d1, I avoid simplification on the c file, and I still stop his plan of playing knight to e5, because if he plays this now, I just swap everything off, and I go knight takes d6, winning the exchange of clearly one ending. So after this rook to d1 move, I'm still winning, but of course I should have won this game a lot easier. The game finished f6, knight takes d6 would have been one way to win, but I wanted to just torture him a little bit more. Queen to b3, two ideas, bishop e6 and bring the queen around to the king side, knight to d8, queen to e3, now queen here, and knight takes d6, and my opponent actually resigned in I think this position or something similar to this. So quite an interesting idea in the opening. This c5 move, which is very popular, I consider a mistake because of this e4 move. A new idea, so for viewers out there, I'd suggest you look at this a bit deeper. And then I also quite like my b4 move in the spirit of old romantic coffee house chess. I missed some clear wins when I got all my pieces the best squares, which was a bit upsetting, so otherwise it'd been a very nice game, but still an exciting game with a number of very interesting moments. So I will put this video quickly on YouTube, which I have a new channel now, so you can look at all old videos on that channel, which I hope you'll enjoy. Thanks for that. I'll catch you soon.